Professor Maria Leptin, from 2021 President of the European Research Council, graduate in mathematics and biology at the University of Bonn and the University of Heidelberg. She built and spent her scientific activity in many different relevant research institutes, from the Basel Institute of Immunology to the Laboratory of Molecular Biology in Cambridge and the Pat O'Farrell Labs at the University of California in San Francisco, and the Max Planck Institute for Development of Biology in Tübingen, Germany. Professor at the Institute of Genetics, University of Cologne in Germany, and visiting professor of other reputed European institutes. Prior to becoming ERC president, Professor Leptin served as the director of MBO from 2010 to 2021. Good morning, Professor Leptin, and thank you to have accepted to have this talk with us, with APRE. We are going to speak with you today in your role of ERC president. So we are going to discuss about ERC. But let's start with some, let's say, ice-breaking question that will not be related to your ERC role, but to your scientist experience. So the first question is natural. You start as a researcher, and do you still remember your first steps in research in terms of feelings?
Well, it depends on what you call the first steps of researcher. You know, you have biology lessons at school and you do experiments in school. Is that research? Don't know. Then you do more ambitious experiments during your coursework at university. I think I remember one of those because I was the only participant in a course that was scheduled. Everybody dropped out, and so only I was left. So I was stuck in a lab at the time. That was something that was not normal at the time. I remember that. That's actually what led me to research, because I was not trained to be a researcher. I was trained to be a teacher, but I was converted by that experience in the lab. So
I got the feelings that you still remember quite well your first emotion as a researcher. Well, the other question is clearly you are not anymore a researcher, or at least in large part of your times, but you still do researcher. But if you should decide in your role of managing roles and scientist role, what still is more emotion for you? What is give you more feelings? Are you more excited as a researcher now, or as a managing director of research?
They're very, very different. I mean, you get emotions in both ways. You know, you achieve something for the community with your colleagues in a team here. That is really satisfying, and you know you've done something that will benefit a large number of people. If you discover something in the lab, that's a very, very special thing, because you know you've discovered something that nobody has ever known or seen before. I think that is actually a sensation that cannot be matched, and I think that's what keeps people in research.
Good.
But ideally should drive them there.
Okay. And now start to approach the ERC. If you should really give few statements about the ERC and what ERC represents in the last almost 15 years, by very short sentences, we have time to discuss in deeper about the ERC. But what is your first feeling reaction to this question?
Well, as you know, the stated aim and mission of the ERC is to fund excellence, and that is visible in the projects that are done. So clearly, excellence stands out. What's perhaps not so obvious, but is necessary for the excellence, and is also a big core thing, is freedom. Because these researchers have the freedom to do whatever they like. And we've just talked about discovery, and discovery needs freedom. You can't plan ahead. If you want to discover something, if you know what you're going to discover, it's not going to be discovery. So this freedom, they're funded for a long time. They're funded generously. That allows them, that gives them the freedom. I think that's one of the core concepts.
We come back on this point of freedom as one of the main characteristics of ERC. And finally, in this first phase, you did a great career, and this required a lot of commitment to work. How you manage your personal dimension with your professional dimension?
You know, that's a strange question, because I've always seen my profession as part of my very personal interests. So I don't really distinguish this. Now, of course, having children is different from being in the lab, and you somehow, and I'm very proud of my children, and they are, in fact, the most important thing in my life. But you know, it was never a question. It was never a question. It's all the same game. You do something with commitment and fun and interest, and you don't measure. I never used to measure.
Crystal clear. Thanks. Now we approach a more ERC part of the discussion, and the first question starts from the point that ERC is a best practice, is a success in the last 15 years. And the question is clear. How to improve something that seems already a perfect, a winning machine? Do you have any issue that you would like to further improve, and how to improve something that is already good?
Yeah, well, so when I came here, that was my statement. I do not need to improve anything. This is a great organization, and all I want to do is stabilize it and maybe grow it. Now, having said that, any organization that considers excellence as its core value has to remain excellent itself. And so the world, even if something is excellent at one moment, the world around it changes. And so we've actually responded to a change in the world out there, especially the world of the younger researchers. And that is to consider whether our assessment of the excellence of a researcher takes into account the way the world has changed. And so we've made some change. We've thought very deeply and extensively about this, and have made some adaptations to the way, it's basically to the way we collect data that we ask from our grantees.
So no to change because there is something to change, but change because the system around us is going to change, and you have to follow. And you had to follow the change.
Yes, and also, of course, you learn as you know. We learn from the panels that do our assessment. So there is a continuous learning by the Scientific Council and by the agency from what goes on around them, and so you know, one has to adapt and be open to new ideas, and I think we're very good at doing that.
Quite clear. You mentioned already freedom as one of characteristics elements of ERC, and I would like to come back on this point. May you argue about the role of ERC in speeding up the growth of the autonomy of the researcher? That was one of the main issues at the beginning when ERC was established. What was the real role in boosting the autonomy of the young researcher?
Yes, well, I mean, a young researcher who receives €1.5 million to do their research with for 5 years has more freedom to do that than somebody who depends perhaps on the head of their department or on the professor's empire in which they have a little bit of space and money. So they're automatically, immediately free of constraints that some others don't have. And I think, so that in itself does that. But nowadays, of course, because of the success of the ERC and because of the recognition of the fact that one has been awarded an ERC, that gives prestige, and that, in addition, leads to more independence of young researchers. They, you know, it gives them a certain power.
Yeah, quite clear. Now entering another area more complex also for ERC. You know, Horizon Europe, most of the Horizon Europe is based on the concept of impact. Now, ERC is the part of Horizon dedicated to fundamental research, or let's say whatever it would be, but not low TRL research for sure. So can you help me to try to give a feeling what does it mean for you in your role of president of ERC, the words impact when we are addressing fundamental research?
So, you know, impact has been co-opted for a certain meaning. Of course, impact itself is neutral. It only means the discovery I have made may have a scientific impact. It may change the way the scientific community thinks about a certain, scientific fact. So scientific impact simply means that what you've done is important and will determine what future scientists do. And that can be measured in many ways. So good science has an impact on its own field or beyond. The impact, the way it's often used in politics, means what does it do for society? And a lot of research does a lot of things for society directly or indirectly. So I think one has to be clear of what one means by impact. Scientific impact, we do want our funded research to have scientific impact, of course.
You already mentioned, or let's say you already used the word measuring, and I would like to come back on this point. My personal opinion is that we can evaluate the impact of fundamental research, but we need a proper metrics. We cannot use the same metrics that we use in another area of research. Do you have any idea about that? We should accept the idea that fundamental research should have an impact, but we need to find the right metrics to measure this impact.
Well, the scientific impact can be measured. You can, for example, if a person on an ERC grant publishes a paper from their work, that paper will be cited by other researchers. So, very simple. How frequently does the world pay attention to our researchers' work? You could also say, how often does it land on the front page of newspapers? That's another impact. So the black hole has not cured cancer, has not led to the discovery of new telephones, but it appeared on the front page of all major newspapers. So, that is a completely different kind of impact. So you can measure that. Or you can measure, if you want to talk about the other kind of impact, namely the usefulness for society, you can measure how often have patents come out of this work, how often have startup companies come out of it, how often is the work quoted in other people's patents. So there are many, many ways of measuring, depending what it is that you want to measure.
Okay, that's clear. It's a complex method, but you have a clear idea about that. Coming back to the point of novelties, there is something new in the recent in the work package and the future work packages. It seems that the weight from the proposal content compared to the past achievement of the CV robustness of a certain scientist is going to change a little in terms of weighting the two elements. If it is true in the future, but what was the reason behind this idea to readapt to weights in a different way?
So really what we've done here is we've put something in words that was already done in practice. So what the panels who select the grant, the proposals to be funded, what they do is they look at the proposal, they look at the idea, they look at the originality, the importance, really the interest of the work first, and then they look at whether the researcher is likely to have the excellence, the ability to carry out that work. So it's already been done that way. In fact, there were just ways that this was handled numerically that didn't reflect that. Mm-hmm. And so we've changed the way now, the mechanism by which this is presented. But the panels have done it anyway, and we wanted to be clear that it's what counts most is the proposal, and then the researcher has to have the excellence to be able to carry that.
Quite clear. So we'll see how this will be digested by the future ERC PI. Mm. Okay, let me allow to address now a question on the Italian landscapes, but feel free to answer the way you like. But the comment is the following. As Italian situation for ERC, we got the point that we have a good participation from nationality, Italian nationality is PI. But if we are going to see how many Italian host institutions are in the statistics, this number is a little different. Despite the last number, and we have just received some new information from ERC, it seems the situation is not so complicated. It's going to be balanced, naturally balanced. But the question is simple. Although this is not clearly a problem that can be traced back to you, because it's not a problem from ERC, but do you have any kind of comments how to interpret it or motivate or to just comment this idea that there is a very good participation from Italian PI to the ERC in the different sector of the ERC, but there is less number compared to the host organization from the Italian system. But I repeat, that is not your problem, it's our problem. But if you have any comments, this is welcome.
Well, let me first give you a good piece of news about Italian grants. So Italy has gained more people into the country within ERC than it has lost people from the country. So I think that's really good news, because it says something important and something that I discuss with many governments who want their base to do better. And that is, of course, it's nothing to do with national talent. We are all the same. All European countries have the same sort of native talent. I think it's to do with the environment that countries provide for their researchers. And there are many aspects to that. There's money. So the percent of GDP spent on science and research and development correlates strongly with the success rates of people, of applicants in the ERC. There's also careers. You know, a young person, you've asked me about independence. So they come and they have their grant. But if the grant is over and there is no independence for a young person to become, you know, to get a professorial situation themselves rather than depending on their professor, I think that's important. The outlook for young people to be independent, to run their own labs, to have their own power over their own resources is an important component. And I mean, Italy is a rich country, and so it can provide funding. But again, the independence of that funding matters. But I've talked to your minister last week, and she's very sympathetic, and I hope we will continue a conversation on with suggestions and with thinking about how Italy can do better with the ERC in the future.
But I fully share with your analysis, but in any case, stay to the numbers that are not so negative, in particular for the trend. So I hope that what you say will also contribute to solve partially this problem. Let's approach the conclusion, and a comment that is really out of the ERC, but is up to you as a scientist and as president. Recently, there was a lot of activity from the conference of the future of Europe, and originally, at least when the conference started, the role of science was not so, science and research was not so well addressed. It was behind many things, but not in the first line. What is your opinion? When we discuss, we approach problems like the ones addressed by the Conference of Europe on the future Europe. Should science be part of this discussion? So can we discuss about the future of Europe without considering the science as one of the main dimensions of our future society?
Well, that is obviously a rhetorical question, isn't it? So the obvious answer is no, we cannot possibly talk about the future of Europe without talking about science and without research being involved. And I actually don't quite understand why this is not obvious. It's perfectly obvious to others. We're talking about Europe being competitive in climate, green, digital, health, all these things. Our politicians want Europe to be leaders. But they forget that all of these things depend on knowledge and new knowledge, not old knowledge. We need new knowledge to solve these problems. Where does new knowledge come from? From research. So we've got to see that. And you know, this is not, I'm not saying something sort of left wing or ivory tower. Chinese President Xi at the last Communist Party meeting, he said that. He was perfectly clear. He says our economy depends on it, our independence, our growth, everything depends on science. So we may not want to listen to everything that we hear from him, but this is something where he's right. US, same thing. Yeah. And those are our big competitors. If we want to compete, we better keep up at first.
Clear. And yes, I can understand how, if you look to the numbers of Chinese laureate degrees, it's incredible compared to ours. So it's a matter that we know we have to deal with, and we cannot lose the game because we cannot support that. Yeah. Another point is, as APRE, we have done a lot of things in the recent years about young. We started an initiative was called Horizon Europe Young Ambassador, just as an example, but just to say that we have discovered there is a need to discuss with young generation in order to prepare for the future when you address science, technological and science dimension. A question to you as a president of ERC is, do you believe there is a role of ERC on working on young generation as far as concerned fundamental research? Is there a role to promote or to push or to dialogue, to tell them what is really the fundamental research and what kind of role this has in their life, not only in our life?
Yes. You know, I wish I could do a lot more on that. I wish we had the time and money and remit to do that. We obviously don't, but we do care, and we have a very nice program, actually a prize, for engagement of our researchers with the public. And we heard some wonderful projects that won these prizes from young people who go out and work, for instance, use school children to do their work with them. I think that's a wonderful initiative because I really think it's there where we have to start. It's with children to see what research is actually about, and that it's very different from what they see in movies in the labs. Yep. It is discovery, it's dealing with, especially in the natural sciences, it's dealing with nature, but in the humanities, it's thinking about societies. I think children should and they're, you know, clever children are so much more fun than anything. So I wish we could do more on that, but it's not our primary remit, unfortunately.
We are on the same boat. Also, we would like to do more, but this is almost a hobby for us because this is not our main task. But I fully share with you that that's the generation that we should prepare for the future. Okay, let's move to the conclusion because the time is moving. There is a final statement that I would like from you. And is the following. Any APREtalks ends with 60 seconds of statements. In this case, what I'm going to ask you is, can you help me to have a statement, like if you was in front of you, young scientist or potential scientist, to convince that his adventure is really a strong and important adventure. And that is the statement that I would like to pass from you.
So I like the fact that you use the term adventure. I'm assuming that adventure will be considering a scientific career or having already started on a scientific career, because it is an adventure. Research is not predictable, and you will have ideas and they will have been based on the wrong assumptions, and you'll stumble, you'll fall. You've got to pick yourself up again. It is not a smooth career, but it's incredibly rewarding. But you have to have you have to have the same qualities that an adventurer has. You have to be bold, you have to be brave, not afraid. So anybody out there who's interested in a career, don't be afraid. And you have to do it for the satisfaction of the work itself. You don't do it to get rich, then go and work in a bank. And you do it for the satisfaction of it, and it is satisfying, but really the message is, go for it, be bold, be brave. When you fall, pick yourself up, try again. And if you don't get an ERC grant, pick yourself up, try it again. Get advice from your friends and colleagues, but if you really want it, you'll succeed.
I like the use of brave. Usually not all people links this word with the science dimension, but I full understand and I appreciate the use of this word from you.
Well, one can also do boring science, and one doesn't have to be brave.
No.
But we're
Yes.
talking here about, hopefully, future ERC grantees. They've got to be brave.
Okay. So, Professor Leptin, thank you a lot for your time. Thank you a lot for what you are doing in your position. As APRE, we already did a lot with your predecessors, and I'm sure that we are going to do a lot with you
Absolutely.
in the next future. So thanks again, and have a nice, great adventure in ERC in your role as president. Thank you.
Thank you.